Welcome to Sam's Business Growth Show. I'm Sam Dunning, a digital marketing, sales, and business growth evangelist. Tune in and subscribe today as I'll be interviewing business leaders, experts, and entrepreneurs from around the globe. You'll be learning their story, how digital marketing has helped them along the way, and exclusive tips and insights to help you skyrocket your own business. Welcome back to the show. I'm truly excited to be joined today by Carson Heady. Carson is a best-selling author of Birth of a Salesman series. Carson's consistently ranked in the top 20 sales gurus in the world. He's currently ranked as one of the top 50 sales authors on LinkedIn. He's got a whopping 330,000 followers across his social channels. He's one of the top Microsoft social sellers and ranked number one against 9 senior leadership and sales roles across 4 companies, including Microsoft, AT&T, and he's a 7-time CEO, Gold Club, President's Club winner. Carson, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Thanks so much, Sam. Doing well, and pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Excellent, dude. So there's plenty we would love to cover with our time with you today. We want to learn your business growth strategies and secrets. We want to learn how digital marketing has helped you along the way. But first and foremost, we'd love to learn a bit more about your background, Carson. So if we could tell us where you grew up, how you got into the business world, and just guide us through some of the key roles that you've had and the lessons you learned along the way up until the present day, if you could, sir.
Without a doubt. So I grew up in a small town called Cape Girardeau, which is about 100 miles south of where I live today in St. Louis, Missouri, in the U.S. And basically lived there for the first probably 20 years of my life, worked at a grocery store, went to high school, college, and then I moved to St. Louis. And when I moved, I actually had originally moved hoping to get a job with AT&T. At the time, they were Southwestern Bell. Cape Girardeau is known for 2 things I've found. One is they're the home of Rush Limbaugh, and number 2 is they're where they filmed the movie Gone Girl with Ben Affleck.
Oh, right, okay. What's Rush Limbaugh, Carson?
Rush Limbaugh is a conservative commentator. He's a radio show host, very well known in the States. So
I know Gone Girl film, but I didn't know
a lot of people have opinions one way or the other, as you can imagine, on politics. So, but yeah, Gone Girl was filmed there a few years back. So it was pretty impressive. Lived in St. Louis for the last 20 years of my life, and I spent 9 years at AT&T. I actually started out thinking that it would be more of a customer service type role, and it was a selling role. And it was inbound. I worked with business owners to start, and then it was switched to a residential center. But it was a situation where it was one call or nothing. Most of my roles at AT&T were that way. So I was promoted into management, then I was into senior management, and then went into a different group into the Yellow Pages when they were starting yellowpages.com. And each time it was, more of a, you get a captive audience, you go through a process and you try to close the deal. I always considered it more of a PG-13 version of Wolf of Wall Street. I got up every day, gave sales speeches, and, people got on the phone and we dialed, and it was an interesting dynamic. I learned a lot in that arena. Really mostly about the importance of sales process. And then I compare and contrast that to my time now with Microsoft, where I've spent the last 6 years. It's been a lot more about relationships. I've been in a few different roles here. I started out in a brand new role. I was kind of a regional business manager role where I was kind of a player coach. I was able to go out and prospect, but also led a team. And we were very successful. We were actually out of St. Louis. We were number 1 in the world 8 quarters in a row. I mean, just unheard of. And
awesome.
I learned a lot about how to prospect, but also how to truly build relationships and how to be a team player. I had typically been an individual contributor up to that point, or had just been a manager of teams or led first and second level managers. So to go into this role and to have so many different colleagues, so many different teammates, it was an interesting dynamic for me. And I would say I've learned more about selling in the last few years than I had my entire career, which is ironic because I was audacious enough to write a sales book 10 years ago. So I've learned more about sales in the last few years working at Microsoft than ever before. So I think that helps illuminate some of the different roles.
I
for
mean,
sure.
let's work up to where you are now. So the first role you said, Carson, what were you doing exactly? You said it was all inbound, and it sounds like you worked your way up the ladder to a management level fairly swiftly. So tell us a bit more about what you're doing and the steps you took to get to a management level.
Yeah, great question. So, Sam, when I started, I was a sales rep on the phone taking inbound calls. When we first started, we were taking calls from business owners. So a lot of times it might have been them calling in to inquire about their bill or their account, or to even just add landline phones. Or this was when DSL high-speed internet was just coming out into the market. So it might have been to sell high-speed DSL internet. But really, that was for business owners. We actually transitioned that office to residential. So, we were fielding calls from people at home with landline phones calling in about their bill. And over the years, we were required to sell anything from corded and cordless telephones to high-speed internet, to dial-up internet, long-distance plans. It was very interesting. So as call would come in, we would take the call, field the inquiry, and if it was something that our division handled, we would be required to take care of that need and sell them something. There was a sales process, as you can imagine, and we would follow that process. I was very fortunate in that time. I spent probably about 2 years in that job, and whereas a lot of folks would average maybe 5 sales a day, I would do 20, maybe 30 every day. And
nice.
Really tried to look for every single call. How do I optimize this call? What's realistic? And it was really only because of I never intended to get into sales. It was really because I had the ability to very quickly figure out what's this customer telling me, get the lay of the land, and then figure out what I had the opportunity to sell in any given situation, and it worked. So that was my first role, and because I did effectively at it, and because I effectively shared a lot of best practices with other folks in the office and had a lot of good relationships, I was actually promoted to a sales management role in that division about 2 years later.
Excellent. Okay, so it sounds like you put in a stellar performance. You're outselling everyone. And how did that happen, Carson? Was that just because you worked harder than everyone else, or were you reading sales books, or did you take inspiration from other people on your team, or was it because you followed a sales process? What made you stand out from the crowd?
I'm ashamed to say that I had no sales discipline or polish when I was younger. I didn't develop that until much later in life, fortunately, thank goodness. When I started out, I was just, I got a taste of what it was like. I come from a small town, and I worked at a grocery store, and I got a taste of real money. And I got a feeling for, hey, I can do this. I had a gift for gab, and I was a hard worker. I didn't miss work.
Got it.
Always there. And I was dependable. They had to tell me to leave once when I got sick, which, nowadays, if you're sick, obviously stay home. Yeah. But they had to tell me to go home. And
oh, wow. Okay.
It was a situation where I wanted to be the best. And I've always had a philosophy: if your name is next to a number, why wouldn't you want that number to be indicative of your skill and your effort? And I always abided by that principle, and I always gave it 100%. So that's why I was successful. I also did another thing. I was always looking for who is the best. When I came in, I wanted to hear what these people were saying, why the people that were successful. And then I would take those little pieces and make that part of my arsenal. There's no reason. It's not taking a meal off the table of somebody else to take something that they're doing well and make it part of your own arsenal. And so I would always look at who's the best and how can I emulate what they do. And because I did that enough and assimilated that into my process, I was becoming successful. And that's what it took. It really took finding out how to be the best in each of these parameters. Sales is about probability, and it's about process. It's also about people, which I didn't really figure out much about until later. I was really just good at the conversational aspect with customers and then matching them to things that we had. But I was becoming very adept at figuring out what the best people were doing, taking that and then doing it as well as I could.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's some really, really good advice for everyone tuning in terms of looking at who's crushing it, who's doing really well in your organization, and just take inspiration from them. So were you just listening to their calls, Carson, just shadowing what they were doing and then implementing that into your own sales techniques? Or
I think that's part of it, Sam. It's funny in call centers, there's a couple ways that people will behave in call centers, and sometimes people will sit there, they'll keep their head down, they'll do their job. I wasn't that guy. I was up and engaging, which is funny because I'm more of an introvert in my daily life. But something about that adrenaline rush of closing deals or even just getting the sale, I was standing up and I was engaging, and I made friends with some of these people in the call centers. And so we would compete. We would find each other competing. So yes, I was absolutely listening to calls. But also, just that water cooler talk. And back then we actually had water coolers. But just the ability to talk to somebody and say, hey, what's working for you? What's not working? What are your thoughts? I was a sponge. I wanted to pick up as much as I could, and I wanted to try to do it better than anybody else. And it worked.
Great tip. And I mean, in my opinion, stubbornness is one of the worst things you can be in sales. So not being open-minded, because none of us are the best. So that's some awesome advice, dude. Okay, so you worked way up, became a manager, it sounds like. And what happened from there, Carson?
So there it was, I tried to get to understand. I think I made a lot of the mistakes that first-time managers make. I tried to be everybody's friend. I tried to help them out. I was probably a little bit, more of a pushover than I should have been. But I think you have to go through those experiences because you have an immediate up, right? I mean, everybody's like, oh, hey, it's the new guy. I want to impress him. And then it's what you do after that honeymoon phase ends that's really going to determine your success as a manager. And
sure.
I was always an advocate for my people, and I think that was very important. I've always been a firm believer in people and process. And so when I became a manager, I became a lot more invested in people. And again, I probably was a little bit too invested out of the chute, and I was always kind of an advocate for people. But I had to get that right temperament to also work with my colleagues and also senior leadership, because if you don't agree with what comes down from senior leadership, sometimes you have to realize, hey, I'm paid to play a role here. I am paid to be an evangelist of this organization. So I spent a lot of time trying to find a healthy balance there, but my teams were very successful. I was always looking for new challenges too. I've always been very inspired by Michael Jordan. I read books about Jordan and just what a competitor he was. He was always asking his coach, Phil Jackson, for different challenges. So I felt like every time I tackled something, I went to my bosses and I'd look for more. When I started, I had 6 people on my team. Then I went to 8. Then I went to 12. Then I went to 20. I had almost 40 people on my team at one point, which nobody else had ever had more than 20. But I wanted more and more and more. And had I not gotten promoted again, I would have had over 50 people on my team. And the main reason for that was because there were small, like, offices that only had 50 people in them, period. And I wanted 50 people on my team just to show that I could do it. I was always looking for different challenges, but I was always looking for ways to make people successful. And it was whatever their own template of that is. Everybody's success looks different. And so there were some people that had a natural ability. And so I felt like my job was to help them get where they wanted to get. If they wanted to get promoted, great. If they wanted to make money, great. If they got themselves into hot water and did something they shouldn't, then help them see the light. Don't just fire them. Don't just get rid of them. Figure out a way to help them see how they can use their talents in a positive way. And then on the flip side of that, if folks came in, because I was the top manager, I often got some of the folks that, we drafted, right? And so I often got some of the folks that were not deemed as, that they would be as high of achievers. And I challenged that, right? Because I feel like everybody can be a high achiever. So I would dig in and figure out, how can I help this person find their pattern of success, listening to their calls, figuring out process, and then getting their buy-in. I think the biggest thing that we as leaders have to figure out is you can't tell somebody how to do something. You've got to get their agreement and their buy-in. Number one, that they need to do something a certain way. But number two, you need to make sure that it's got their voice. I can't just hand somebody a sales script and say, hey, read this. It's got to be in their voice, and they've got to understand why they're doing it and how to do it. So that's how
Awesome.
I spent the majority of my time as a manager in that role.
Got it. So you built up quite a hefty team by the sounds of it, one of the biggest teams the organization had ever seen. So tell us a bit more. So if anyone in business listening, or anyone that manages any kind of teams, give us some insights into how you can keep teams positive and motivated, and how you're actually able to scale such a large team, because as we all know, managing more and more people, the more people you've got to manage, the more difficult it becomes. And to keep all these people highly motivated, especially salespeople, can be quite a challenge, I'm sure.
It is.
So, yeah.
I think part of it is have fun. It's the energy. We spend more time in our job than we spend at home with our families. So I think a lot of times it's so critical for managers and leaders to understand that you've got to provide an environment where people feel engaged, where they feel like their opinion matters, where they feel valued. So I spend a lot of time sharing best practices. I communicate a lot. People are going to ask you questions. If you're in leadership, people are going to ask you questions all the time. You may not always have the answers, but it's critical that you reply. It's critical that you respond. It's critical that even if you can't make a change that they're asking for, that you show that you care and that you show that you tried. So I've always been a firm believer, there's two different, you can either under communicate or over communicate. It's very hard to find a balance right directly in between. So I probably always have over communicated. I still do it today because I feel like people value communication and being heard. And so I spent a lot of time trying to really engage a lot of these folks to make sure that I had their buy-in and their that they're understanding that they mattered as part of the team, but a lot of sharing best practices. Somebody had a great sale or a great win. How can I promote that? But also, I think one thing that's amiss is we as sellers, a lot of times we see these cool like sales flashes, but we want to know the whole story. Like, how did that happen? So I would take it one step further and really try to understand, okay, what were the makings of this deal? How did you put this together? Again, like the having fun aspect, getting out there and I'd sit on calls with these guys. I'd make and take calls with them and for them so that they could see that I still, number one, knew how to do it, but number two, actually understood their job. And then I'd say the last piece of that, Sam, is always making sure that they're on the journey with you. I think it's the same thing with customers, right? I mean, you don't sell a customer anything. You clear the path for them to make the decision that you think that they should make. Same thing with working with sales reps, same thing with working with sales managers. You want to take them along in the journey. So to do that, you have to make sure that you understand them, you understand what motivates them, you understand what they're after, and you understand what gaps they may have in their current process. But it's not enough for you to know those gaps. They have to see it too. And so it's critical to make sure that they see that and understand. Anytime that I took on a new team or a new team player or whatever that looked like, it wasn't, I never wanted to come in and just start telling them what to do. I wanted to make sure that I spent time with them to understand what mattered to them, but also how they did their job and what they thought would make their job better, what they thought would make our department and our team better. And then I would work with them on a plan to improve. I took over a team once that was on the verge of being shut down. It was this customer experience group that called on existing customers. The goal was to upsell them. And the team was doing 70% to goal, and they were going to be closed down. And I said, I'll take them. Before you close them, like, just give me a shot. Let me take them on. And this was in addition to my existing duties, mind you. I took over that team.
And this is in the same company at the same time?
Same company, same time. This was actually still at AT&T. This was when I was in the advertising space. I took over this group, and I think a lot of these guys expected me to come in, just make some immediate changes. I didn't make a change for 30 days. I spent time with them. I gathered information. I sat with them on calls. I took calls. I made calls. I was actually part of their process, and then I met with them multiple times to understand what they thought of their job, that they saw value in their job, that they saw value in what they were doing and the service that they were bringing to customers, how they envisioned where this job would go. And then I asked them what changes they felt like we needed to make to become successful. And I told them, I was like, guys, you're on the verge of shutdown. I don't want to make any changes unless we have the full buy-in of this team. We're going to make these decisions collectively. And we did. At 30 days, we made decisions collectively. And that team went from 70% one month to 141% of goal the next month. 1 month turnaround. And obviously
Amazing.
they kept the division open. But I think that's where it's so critical to understand that results can be achieved by a team. These people, for whatever reason, they're all in their role for a reason. So it's not our job as managers to try to find ways to undermine that or to, cut the bottom percentage. Everybody's there for a reason. So let's figure out how we can collaborate and work together. And when people feel safe in that environment and like somebody's not out to get them, somebody's empowering them, somebody's motivating them, they're going to achieve. They're going to achieve better than anything you can imagine. And that's what I've always tried to do as a manager, is remove obstacles to their success, but cut through the, I'm not a believer in excuses. I can't stand excuses, but I will remove legitimate obstacles to success. I will listen, I will communicate, and I will advocate for my people every time. And it's always worked.
Some really solid tips there, Carson, on keeping teams motivated, and especially that I love a couple of things there where you mentioned about the way that you took on a team that was really struggling and then really listened to what they had to say and then got behind them and made sure everyone was collectively focused on the same goal and then made it happen the next month. You've managed a lot of people at the same time, it sounds like. How did you manage your time though? With so many people, how were you managing effectively your own time so you could speak to everyone in turn and make sure everyone was on the same page?
Well, back then I was single, and
okay,
so
that helps.
I just gave every aspect of my day and time to my work, which isn't the most effective way. Now I have a wife, I have 2 kids and 1 on the way, and thank you. And so it's a little bit different. And I would say it's really, it's about prioritization, but it's also about, mutual understanding and finding better ways to scale and to communicate. A lot of people just need a quality touch, right? And that can look any number of ways. Back in my 20s, that might have meant I was on the telephone with somebody for an hour, or as long as they wanted to talk, because they wanted to talk through a sales problem or an issue with their team or, whatever it was, and I was giving advice. Now that may look a little bit different. I don't have an hour to give necessarily. So it's really about, hey, I just need to make sure that this person feels heard. I also think that the proactive outreach really helps, especially in a time like this where there's a lot of uncertainties in the world. I think it's critical that you reach out proactively to people and just ask them how they're doing, if they want to have a conversation. Those types of things matter, and they show that your care for them is genuine. So as far as management of time, there's another thing that I learned a few years back. Because I was not a good manager of time earlier in my career. I just made time for everything and everyone and just let them run all over my calendar. A few years back, I had a manager that I worked for that really taught me more how to aggressively manage my own schedule. And so I look at it every day, while I'm actually on the treadmill in the morning or whatever I'm doing to start my day. I'll look through my calendar. And if there's something that's not mission critical, sort out what is mission critical, right? What are the non-negotiables? What do I have to do today? And so I'll make a short list of those things for myself, because it's helpful for me to see that and then just go through those items and knock them off the list. And if I realize that a day is going to be especially daunting and there may be a call that I have that doesn't have to happen today, I'll move it. And I will do that unashamedly. And I think it's critical to understand or be able to know the difference between what's non-negotiable and what can wait until next week. Sure. I'm a sales guy. I'm very assertive. I like to do things yesterday. So there is a challenge to that. You're not going to just flip on a light switch and all of a sudden just be able to aggressively manage your schedule. It took time. But where I challenge you as a business leader, as a business owner, look at your schedule, figure out what has to be done today, and prioritize those things. Frankly, I'm going to tell you this, at the end of the day, you're going to look back and you're going to feel a lot more like you achieved something if you do it that way than if you don't. Because there are definitely days where I feel bamboozled at the end of the day, and I look back and I'm like, what did I really accomplish? I didn't really do anything.
Same. I had someone on a little while back that I can link you to soon, a guy called Rich at a company called Refract. Anyway, he was telling me about the importance of putting together to-do lists the night before. So putting together the key tasks. So say it was a Sunday night and you knew what you had to do on Monday. Put together the key task in a simple list, prioritize them as well. So if we're talking about sales reps, it might be, I need to do these follow-ups, I need to do these prospecting calls, I need to make these new connections, I need to do these cold outreaches and so on. And that way you've got it clearly mapped out, and it doesn't get to 9 a.m. the next day. And then you're like, oh, what have I got to do? I've got all this stuff to do. And then it gets to the end of the day, like, what have I actually accomplished today? So I know the exact feeling because I've been there myself so many times.
And
so,
it's
yeah,
hard. I mean, sometimes you have to schedule time to drive in your car or to check email. And you've got to drown out some of the stuff. If you've got something that has to transpire in the morning, do not get caught up in the onslaught of emails that are inevitable, because they're going to happen. And then you're just going to be caught up in the fires. The fire is going to burn you. So definitely don't address the fires until you have the stuff that you got to get done complete.
Nice, dude. Okay, so what happened next in your journey then? So you managed some successful teams. You brought those to a good level. Did you stay with the company, or did you move on then, or what was next?
So, So I was at AT&T 9 years. After I was in the original call center where I was a manager, I was recruited into a division of AT&T Yellow Pages back when they had the Yellow Pages, and yellowpages.com, which is starting out. We were selling online marketing packages. We eventually started selling print Yellow Pages and search packages and websites.
Cool, man. Okay.
I ran a team, and then I ran the division. After a year, I got promoted to run the whole thing, and we were very successful. Unfortunately, the fact that we were hitting $50 million on a $40 million goal didn't matter when the print Yellow Pages losses of the entire company were what they were. So that division does not really exist in its original iteration anymore. I was laid off at that time, and started looking for something else. And frankly, that was a good lesson for me, because I thought that because of the experience that I had, I could walk in wherever I wanted to something comparable, and I was dead wrong. I needed a network. I needed relationships, and I didn't have any of that. And it was actually around that time I was reading articles about LinkedIn. LinkedIn was just really starting out into prominence, which, obviously Microsoft, where I work now, owns LinkedIn. So it's been an interesting journey. But I started learning how to use social media, how to use digital selling to build a network and to build relationships. At first, I knew nothing about it. I spent time trying to do that, and I was off for about a year, and I wrote a book. That's when I wrote Birth of a Salesman. When I was at AT&T, I did a lot of blogging and articles and things like that.
Okay. So you had some experience in content creation and things.
Yeah, and I was passionate about writing, and I was passionate about sales. But also, there's a lot of sales books out there, and I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So I kind of created a sales parable type thing, kind of like 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, where it's a story within a book about selling. And so I did that. I wrote out to 968 publishers and agents. I only had 15 that agreed to read my book, and 6 offered to publish it, and I picked the one with the best deal. So did that. Obviously haven't sold enough to retire, but if I hadn't written that book, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have gotten the job that I got at Verizon not long after. And then I got recruited by T-Mobile, and then I got recruited by both Apple and Microsoft. And so here I am, and I've been at Microsoft for 6 years, and I have now working on my 4th book. So it's been an interesting journey. The jobs with Verizon and T-Mobile were more of a district manager, working with some of their indirect retail organizations. I was managing teams still, but it was different because it was in retail, and I had never been in retail before.
So just to clarify, Carson, the book was a turning point by the sounds of it, because it helped you network with all these different people and also jump into some new opportunities and a new job for you. Was that right?
Without a doubt. And I think, Sam, that's a great point that I definitely don't want lost here. I'm a sales guy, and I don't think anything I've done couldn't be done by anybody else. But where I would not have gotten that interview at Verizon had I not written that book. And here's why. I even asked the guy who was my boss. His wife had actually been looking through resumes, and mine stood out because I had written a book. And that's it. We are always, as sellers, as leaders, as business professionals, we're always just looking for ways to differentiate ourselves. That could be as simple as, I've got a friend of mine who puts that he's a saxophonist in his LinkedIn headline, because it's a conversation starter. It's provoking. It's provocative. And I think that's what, not everybody is a writer. So everybody does something that's unique. Play that up, because those are the types of things that forge real connections. I got noticed because I had written that book. I hadn't lit the world on fire with the book, but I got noticed because of it, and that's how I got that next job. And then that's how I got the next job, because I was recruited by that. And I look back in my career, I was always pulled into jobs because of people that I knew every time, but that once. And I think it's very valuable to realize that it's all about the network and it's all about relationships.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I love the part you mentioned then as well about staying memorable, and making yourself a bit unique, which is especially important if customers are talking to multiple vendors and things like that. Being able to differentiate yourself and stand out from the crowd, that's a really good point. All right, Carson, are there any more insights rather that you can share with us throughout your roles that led up to Microsoft? Any other particular highs and lows or big wins that you had, or any business lessons that you learned along those steps?
Leading up to Microsoft, especially since AT&T, I mean, there was a lot of ups and downs. I went to this Verizon group and I actually ended up getting laid off again a year later.
Okay.
And it's confounding, right? I mean, I felt like, man, I've had a lot of success in selling. I'd moved up very quickly. I got promoted 3 times in 6 years at AT&T, and it was confounding. And then I got this T-Mobile gig because I got recruited by a contact that I had made at Verizon. And I spent a little over a year and a half there. I made a move to a business consultant firm. That didn't pan out the way that I had hoped. But fortunately, I'd made a contact at T-Mobile that recruited me into Microsoft. And I wasn't originally going to go. It was an interesting situation. I thought that I had something else lined up. And so I kind of disregarded this role. The other thing didn't pan out. And the day that it didn't pan out, I called the gentleman who had interviewed me at Microsoft. And turns out the person that they had hired I was their first choice. The person that they had hired to replace me didn't take the job. And so
Right.
I took the role, and but there was a lot of ups and downs, a lot of inconsistency, and I think that's indicative of your career. I mean, there's a lot of changes. I made some risks. Maybe sometimes they didn't pay off. But we can't be afraid to make risks, albeit, we want to make strategic risks in our career. I had written another book in that interim, and just continuing to try to create content, add unique value, but all the while learning a lot. I think that's where I really learned about how to leverage social media and to really build a community around what I did, which served me so well at Microsoft. I came into a brand new role that didn't exist prior. And so I had a lot of ability to kind of create that role. There wound up being close to 80 people that did that role back when I did it. I think there's over 100 now that do that role. But it was interesting because I don't think they really knew the mold of what to hire. They hired a lot of different types of people that had technology backgrounds. I did not have a technology background.
So when you say you created your own role, Carson, what do you mean exactly? What happened there?
Yeah, so there wasn't really a blueprint, right? I mean,
okay.
So we were working directly with the retail channel, and they were sourcing hardware, and eventually they were able to sell other facets, cloud services and cloud solutions, et cetera. I think some folks that they hired, they were, traditional road warrior account executives. There were other folks that they hired that were retail folks. I didn't fit any of those molds. I was a complete X factor, complete wild card. So I came in and I just decided, hey, I'm going to do what I've done in previous roles, and I'm going to build a community around what I do. I'm going to make a newsletter. I'm going to do events. I'm going to do webinars. I'm going to try to find different business partners that are selling what we sell, and figure out, how do I empower them? How do I help them? I'm going to go back through, I'm going to use social media to try to meet people. And I'm also going to go through all the people that have gone through the retail channel that were business customers, because that's who we were selling to. That's who my team was selling to. And just prospect to them and go meet them. And it's funny, I had 2 really, really big wins in that job. I had most of the people in our role probably sold to, maybe 200-300 unique customers. We sold to 8,000 over the time that I was there. And
wow.
It was incredible, but we had 2 just gargantuan deals that we did. And one of them, I was basically told, don't chase them. They're not going to do anything. They're buying through this other group, and you're not going to be able to get it. And so I went out there, met with them, understood the terms and conditions of what was happening, and then came back, and I was able to offer them a more competitive deal, and it made sense for my company. I believe in a holy sales trinity. It's about the customer, the company, and you. Those three have to benefit on every deal. And if you can make sense out of it in a deal, make it work. And so we had two really prominent wins in that, but we also had a good breadth of customers. We had more customers than anybody else. And it was because we were engaging, because we had, we met people where they were. And frankly, we were trusted advisors. People call me up, and if I wasn't the right guy, if it wasn't our solution, sometimes I would refer people to competitors because I had friends there. I knew them, and I'm like, hey, I can't do this. We don't do this. Or I understand you're not looking exactly for my product or service. However, I got a buddy of mine who works over at XYZ. Let me introduce you to them. They'll take care of you. So people kept coming back because they knew that we were always going to steer them right. And that's what catapulted us in St. Louis to #1 in the world 8 quarters in a row.
Some great points there. What was that triangle technique you said then? You said there was a 3-way...
Yeah, I call it the holy sales trinity.
That was it, the holy sales trinity.
Yeah, the customer, the company, and you. And all three have to benefit on every single deal. The customer, if you bend over backwards to please the customer, but you cut yourself too deep on margin, the company loses and you lose. You don't get paid. And that's not going to be good for your business model. If you take too much care of the company, the customer suffers and you suffer, then who wins? You've got to make sure that all three benefit, sometimes equally. They're not always going to benefit equally, but you have to make sure all three benefit equally on every deal, or it's a bad deal.
Yep, and I love that trusted advisor statement you just made there, Carson. The fact that if your solution is not a fit for someone, just say, look, I'm afraid we can't help on this instance, but I know this guy at this company or this girl at this company, they can help you out. And they're not going to forget that. So 6 months, a year down the line, they're going to come back. They're going to give you a call. Carson, thanks very much. You helped me out. I've got this project. I think it's a good fit for you guys. Let's have a chat. So
I had people so many times that said, I know you're more expensive, but I want to do business with you because you respond to me and because I can trust you. It's that simple.
Got it. And one more golden nugget that you put back there. You said there was an account that you worked that no one had ever, or everyone was telling you against it. Everyone was turning you against it. So why did you do that? What was the thoughts behind that?
Well, part of it's because I rarely listen to what I'm told.
Same.
But
Same thing.
But I believe in have the conversation. The person had done business with our retail store before, right? They had bought some units and then they just never did again, right? So why didn't they? What were they doing now? What's the current situation? And I always go in with the pretense of, how can I help you? Look, I work for this organization. You have a relationship with them or you don't have a relationship with them or whatever. But I also, as time goes by too, you're not just selling your organization, you're selling your own personal brand. And that's why I talk so much about, utilizing your own personal brand, because I knew that there would be value that I could bring to this organization one way or another. And if somebody will take a meeting with you, go out there, listen to them, figure out what they're doing. They took a meeting with me and I went out there and I just talked to them and understood what their current arrangement was. And I asked them if I'm able to do something better than that. Is that something that would be of interest? And, of course, you're always trying to pepper in additional things that you can provide. There were trainings and things like that my team could do. There were other little value adds. So you can kind of come in under the pretense of some of the free services or some of the immediate gives. But ultimately, I just want to understand, you'd bought at one point, what's your current deal? And if I could provide you something better than your current deal, would it be interesting? It was, and it worked out. And that was one of the largest deals that division's ever done.
Awesome. Okay, well that's some really good advice, that not to ignore customers that have bought from you before and just ask the simple questions. And that's a really good lesson for anyone in business or sales or even marketing. Awesome, dude.
And I think the other piece that I would mention to that, Sam, is there were rules around some of the ways that this group was buying, because they were also reselling some of these devices. And so because there were rules in place and because this customer had a unique situation, I was able to go back to the people that set those rules and make a case that it didn't fit under those exact guidelines of what we couldn't do. And I think there was a preconceived notion that, hey, you're just not going to be able to do this, so don't bother. It was worth the legwork because we were able to put it together. It was good for the customer. It was good for the company. It was obviously good for me and for my team. So, I looked for a way to make that holy sales trinity at the heart of the deal that I was putting together. I was able to fit it in under the guidelines and make it make sense. and it worked out. So I think sometimes it's all about challenging. If you see a value in what you're doing, don't be afraid to kind of challenge the norm and the misconception. Now, granted, if somebody had told me point blank, don't take that meeting, then I wouldn't have. But they were like, don't bother chasing it. It's a lost cause. I don't believe in lost causes. I'm going to go after it, and I did it, and it worked.
Got it. Awesome, dude. So you talked a few minutes back about building up a network. So for everyone tuning in, what is the best way to build an effective network, Carson?
I can tell you the way that works.
Is there one best way?
Yeah, I was going to say that could look any number of ways, Sam. And I'm going to tell you the way that worked for me. And I think that it's all been a building work in progress. When I started out, when I wrote my book, right, I was told, my publicist was like, hey, get a Twitter account, get all this. I didn't know anything about Twitter. I didn't know much about LinkedIn, but I started studying these things. And so when I was at the business consultant firm right before Microsoft, I was just cold calling. I had no brand to sell. I mean, I worked for a small consultant firm. I was basically just trying to get meetings with folks. And so it was basically going out on LinkedIn, trying to connect with people, trying to get a meeting. And I did. And it was because of, I think a lot of people, business owners, sellers, we go after, if we want to talk to somebody in an organization, or if we want to talk to a person, we go after that person. We'll go after one, maybe 5 people. I'll go after 100. I'll go after every single person in that organization that I think that can help me in some way, whether it's good intel, whether it's to get me to introduce me to their boss, whatever it is. So when I'm building a network, I'm thinking very holistically rather than singularly. And so when I'm building that network, it's all about who are the people, number one, that I feel like I can learn something from. And I feel like I can learn something from anyone. As I've gotten more seasoned and older in my life and career, I've become a lot more humble. It's amazing too what being laid off a couple of times does, and bouncing around to a few gigs after you get laid off. It humbles you, and I needed that. I needed to realize that I'm just a guy that needs to find what unique value he can bring. And so mine was, I need to create a network and relationships. And I won't profess to have said that I've done it perfectly, but I have utilized LinkedIn and other social tools to go out, connect with people, and then realize one thing about that those tools can make the connection, but there's nothing that replaces the conversation or the face-to-face, the actual true, the relationship itself. So I've used those as a means to an end, a means to get the face-to-face conversation and then create a community around what I'm doing.
Completely agree. And that's exactly what I'd say about LinkedIn. It's a great place to network, great place to consume content and put out decent content. And ultimately, if you're going to use it as a salesperson or a business owner, you want to start conversations. So you want to generate inbound leads or prospect out, be that messaging, DMs, be that voice messages, video, whatever, but start the conversation, then bring it offline or bring it to a Zoom call like we're having right now. Now, you mentioned an interesting point just now, Carson, about not just connecting with the DMs, the decision makers, so the directors or the owners of business, but also everyone involved around them, so all the other employees. Now, is that only relevant for enterprise level deals, or is it relevant for transactional as well?
Love it. Great questions. Sales is all about probability. I had a deal about 4 years ago where I'd seen these reports and people that were just basically testing services and tiny little amounts of consumption, but they were obviously doing something. And so I went out and I found a couple of these organizations that had some of the top, amounts that were testing, but they weren't buying anything. And I just used LinkedIn, and I, rather than going after 1, 2, or 5 of the senior people at these organizations, I'd go after 30, I'd go after 50, and I'd send them all connection requests and just try to get after them. And, there was one that I sent 30 requests to. They were a small organization, sent 30 requests, and I got 11 that accepted my contact request. And then I had 1 that replied to my follow-up. That's it, 1. And they said, yeah, you need to talk to this guy. We're actually testing you against another competitor, and you need to talk to this guy because he's running that project. So I called him up and ended up going out there. And I actually went out there under a preconceived notion. I didn't think it was going to be a very large deal. But I went out there and again, created the face-to-face, from the digital selling platform. And long story short, within 3 months, we moved their entire platform into our cloud. It was the biggest deal done in our division that year. And that deal is still paying off because they're still a client. It was a new logo for us. They're still a client, great partnership, great relationship. But when I talk about, that type of approach, that's worked for me in working with mom and pop shops, 1, 2 sole proprietor shops, 5, 10, 15 employees, all the way up to some of the massive deals that my team and I have done over the last several years. I took the same approach. I got a new gig about 6 months ago, and I took the same approach. I'm in an interesting spot today. I work in technology and healthcare, and I was able to connect with some of the senior leaders of some of these massive, health organizations on LinkedIn. I sent them a note day 1, day 2 in the role, and I was meeting some of these senior folks. Now, I didn't discriminate. I don't just want to meet with the senior folks. I've actually connected with over 150 people at some of the top organizations that I service today. And I haven't met them all in person, but I'm connected with them. And I think what's key to understand when you do this, Sam, is that you're building a community around what you do, but you're meeting them where they want to be met. Some of these people met with me right away, face to face, but a lot of them, they're part of my network. And now I'm inviting them to webinars that we do. I invite them to events. I send them a newsletter. And a lot of times that's when they decide to engage. We've all seen marketing statistics. It takes 5 to 10 contacts or quality touches before somebody will engage. And people are doing more investigation online now than ever before. So I think what we've got to understand as sellers is it's about quality touches. And a quality touch isn't always me calling them or emailing them saying, hey, I'm checking in or I'm following up. No, it's about, hey, I saw this article and it reminded me of the conversation that we had 6 months ago. I thought of you. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Or, hey, I saw your company did some merger and acquisition activity. I wanted to see if we could help in any way, shape, or form. Leave it at that. And they may not respond. That doesn't mean they're ignoring you. I've had so many times where I've sent a newsletter to somebody and it reminded them that they owed me a reply from an email from a couple weeks back. And then they sent me an email, completely separate thread. They heard of you. And that business consultant firm that I worked for years back, the best thing I learned there is always stay top of mind. And that can look very different depending on where you are or what you're doing. Just stay top of mind. I communicate a lot. Yes, I know I post a lot on social media, but you think about me, right? I show up, you think about things, and as long as you're creating and putting out quality content, there is a value there. And I have been able to enter into so many conversations with people all over the world just because of thought leadership that I try to share. And I don't create all of that content. Yes, I write. Yes, I blog. But it isn't always about that. It's about putting things out there that are thought-provoking where you can have a dialogue and have a conversation and have a meaningful relationship. And that's always what I've tried to do. So utilizing the digital selling platforms to create real relationships and then, again, build a community around what you do and keep trying to find ways to engage people in that community, and they will talk to you. Some of the best deals that I did, my last job that I won Gold Club in at Microsoft were customers that I rarely had spoken to over the 3 years that I had done that job. But in the last year, the planets aligned because we had kind of found some common ground. I kept engaging them and sending them things that were of value. Little did I know because they weren't replying, but eventually they did. And we were able to move forward and make a deal happen that benefited everyone. So
awesome, man.
Be persistent, be patient, be communicative, be consistent, be transparent. You'll win.
And just before we move on, that's some really awesome advice. When you say you're sending prospects things of value, can you drill down into that into a little bit more just so we can understand what that means exactly in layman terms?
Without a doubt. And don't get me wrong, there's no magic button for that. Like, you're never going to 100% know what's going to be of value. But you can certainly we're in a storytelling world, Sam. I mean, people want to hear stories. They want to hear, okay, somebody in a similar situation to me did this and they benefited. They want to know what's available. We're also in a world too where data is what everybody's burning to get after. How can I monetize my data? How can I better use my data? How can I get more data? How can I connect my data? And then how can I use that data to make better decisions and glean insights? And that's the world we're in. So I think anytime that you see something that is industry specific or that is specific to what that organization or that person is doing, all the way to content that is in line with maybe conversations that you've had with them or with people in their organization. How powerful is it when you reach out to a C-level and you're able to say, hey, I talked to a lot of people in your organization. This is feedback that I'm getting. I saw this today, and it reminded me of kind of what it sounds like your organization is trying to do. And this could be a C-level that's never spoken to you, but to send them something like that and to say, hey, I'm coming from a position of strength because I've spent the time talking to people in your organization. I saw this. This is a story. This is real. This is what's happening. This is what people are doing in this situation. I'd love to get your thoughts. And I think one thing that we've got to understand too is it's not always all about asking them for something or trying to get a sale. It's really more about trying to get a meeting. It's really about just trying to find a way to add value and always go in under the pretense of what they want to talk about. And then what value you may be able to bring to them. That's not always going to be a sale right out of the gate. I work for a company right now that a lot of people do business with. And so I think there was a conception that a lot of folks had that I was going to come in and try to sell them something, or I was just going to show up when we wanted their money. A lot of people expect that of sellers, right? So sure. I try to challenge that norm, and I always come in under the pretense of, hey, you invest very substantially in our organization. I'd like to sit down and figure out how we can bring more value to what you're already buying, because there's always more that you can do together. So true. And more value that you can add. And I think if you look for ways to add value for what they're doing today, if you challenge the norm and don't sound like everybody else, think about it. If you sound like everybody else, you're going to be treated like everybody else that reaches out, which means you're going to get the cold shoulder. Take the time to be different, be unique, differentiate yourself, come in from a situation where you want to add unique value, send them stories, send them things that you think will resonate. I even send surveys sometimes to customers and say, hey, here's 5, 10 really hot topics right now. Are there any that you'd like to talk about that you'd like me to bring in a specialist specifically for your industry to talk to you about what we're doing, what they're doing, what people in this organization or this industry are doing? Try to find any way you can to offer and inform. And I think those are the things that are going to make you stand out because you want to earn a relationship. You don't want to get a sale. Sale is a byproduct. Results are a byproduct of people and process, and making people and process at the heart of everything that you're doing. And I think the more you focus on that, the better you will be.
Love that. Love that. And those are some really awesome tips for opening up conversations and, like you say, real tangible ways to add value. Just before we move on, Carson, because I think you're going to have some nice advice on this, is there a good way to follow up? Now, this could be really useful for everyone tuning in, rather than just the usual, just catching up to see how you're doing, just seeing if you're ready to sign. Just wondering if we can bring this deal over the line. Is there anything better than that? So maybe what you've said just now could come into play in terms of being able to share valuable content. But is there any way you could differentiate yourself from just the usual follow-up email or follow-up call or just mundane things that people say when they're trying to get a deal over the line?
Yeah, without a doubt, Sam. I think there's a couple things. Number one, we talked earlier about bringing them on the journey with you, which means building consensus, which means getting their buy-in, which means we've already agreed on timelines and milestones that need to transpire to get from point A to where we want to go. And if you've isolated a need and there's an understanding that this needs to happen and you know that there's interest, then it's very imperative that you lay out the milestones that need to transpire to get there, right? Do we need to do a certain type of engagement? Do we need to do a certain type of assessment? Do we need to produce some kind of statement of work? What is going to be entailed? What is the pre-sales process? What will the post-sales process look like? So it's imperative that you lay that out, and I think that falls on you before any follow-up is even required. You want to establish those parameters, because when you are following up, rather than just saying, hey, checking in, seeing where this deal is, seeing where we are, what do you need, what questions do you have, rather than doing all that, you want to come from a position of strength in everything you do. And so I find that it's more valuable to be able to go back and say, I want to make sure that we are being respectful of the timelines that you have already established or that we have collectively established to get where we need to go. And if they go dark, because let's face it, a lot of customers will go dark. They still, no matter what you do or what you say, they still won't respond. Then you go back and you ask them, is this still a priority? And it's okay. Look, I've always been a firm believer that yes or no is better than maybe so. I don't need somebody
So
to
true.
string me along for 6 months on a deal. I don't need that. So if this isn't a priority anymore, just tell me, because I will move on. I'll take my resources elsewhere, and I'll go after somebody who wants to spend time with me. I think that's so critical for people to understand, is that I'd rather have the no than a maybe. So if they ghost you a couple times, absolutely say, is this still a priority? You established 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that you wanted to move forward in this fashion. We agreed that these were the milestones we needed to hit. Is this still a priority? Bold it, underline it, whatever, and just get an answer. Because I think it's important that you understand that, and even put some skin in the game so that they sense that there is some serious effort on your part. I tell them, like, hey, I have resources lined up to do what we agreed to do. I need to understand right now if I need to book them for this or if I need to let them go to their other projects. I get a response almost every time for that.
Love that.
But the other thing I would add, Sam, is if you effectively build a community around what you do, and you've got a newsletter and you've got a different targeted outreach and you're sending stories and you're sending articles, they're going to reply to you. It's that simple. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it might take 3, 4, 5 newsletters, but I've had customers that have been dark on me for months that actually, after a 5th newsletter from me, they reply. And they say, hey, Carson, I know I owe you a reply on this. Let's talk. You never fully will understand what's going on in your customer's world because they're not going to tell you everything. But I think it's important that you understand that the planets sometimes have to align. People have bad days. People get pulled into fires. Priorities change. And you have to make sure that you understand that their world does not revolve around you, number one. But number two, to meet them where they are, it can take a lot of different components. And so try to find different ways to stay top of mind without being aggressive, without being forceful, and really just being respectful. Hey, I just wanted to make sure that we were honoring the timelines that we already established. I've got the resources that are ready to be booked, but I need an answer today. If I'm booking them for you or if I can assign them to a different project. And I think if you're respectful and you're tactful, people will return that favor.
No, that's it. I think you're right. If it gets to the stage of you having to follow up consistently and for a long time, it usually, not always, means you've lost a deal. But like you say, staying front of mind throughout is such a good tip. And you've laid out some really nice digital channels that people can invest in. So whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's an email list, whether it's a blog, all these different ways that you can put out content to people that you want to engage with, start conversations. And if they do go quiet, then they're still going to be hearing from you anyway. So in 6 months' time, when things clear up, they may well reach out to you. Awesome. Well, Carson, you've shared some absolute golden nuggets with us today. Really appreciate it. Everyone, you've been tuning in to Sam's Business Growth Show, where we sit down with business leaders, experts, and entrepreneurs from around the globe. We find out their story, how digital marketing has helped along the way, and their exclusive tips and insights to help you skyrocket your business. Carson, what I'd like to ask everyone before we finish is if you could thank just one person, either dead or alive, for having a positive influence on yourself and your career, who would that be and why?
Got to say my dad. I have spent my entire life just wanting my dad and my mom, but mostly my dad, to be proud of me. He was always the most respectful and caring and empathetic guy. Now, he was the disciplinarian when I was a kid, so he was the one who, like, I didn't want to tick off dad. But when I moved away, and especially when I became a dad myself, he was just my friend. And, we communicate a lot. Actually, in light of what's going on in the world today, we communicate all the time. So we're emailing each other all day long because we're both homebound. Granted, I'm working and he's got stuff around the house, his honey-do list, if you will. But I always have sought his approval. He's been the most consistent presence in my life. I've had a lot of people come in and out of my life over the last 40 years. And he has definitely been the one most consistent person that, that I've always wanted to have a relationship with. When I was younger, that looked different. And as I'm older and now that I'm a dad, I look at that a little bit different, but I've always wanted him to be proud of me. And I'd say that has made me work hard, harder than anybody else that I was ever around, because I just wanted my parents' pride. And I have that, and it's the greatest blessing on earth. And I think that makes me a better husband, better dad, better employee, better leader, better everything because of that that I've always been searching for.
Amazing, man. Excellent. So tell us a bit more about how people can connect with you and the best way people can get in touch with yourself.
Yeah, Sam, I appreciate that. LinkedIn is a great way, and I will reply. I love talking to people. LinkedIn, I'm definitely out there. Twitter as well. So either one of those would be great. All of my books can be found on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And I've also got a blog that's out on the web as well. So any of those mechanisms, happy to connect, would love to as well. I really look forward. The greatest benefit of writing the books that I've written, because like I said, I haven't sold enough to retire, has been connecting with people all over the world, people like yourself and other sellers and leaders that are out there in the community.
And just remind us of all the books' names, just for everyone tuning in.
Yep. So Birth of a Salesman, The Salesman Against the World, A Salesman Forever, and coming later this year, Salesman on Fire.
Awesome. I love that name, Salesman on Fire. Fantastic. So the show is sponsored by webchoiceuk.com, helping businesses skyrocket their leads, sales, and brand positioning via results-driven digital marketing, SEO, conversion-focused websites, and custom mobile apps. That's webchoiceuk.com. Carson, really appreciate your time, man. It was a pleasure.
Sam, you do great work, and the pleasure is mine. Appreciate you.
Subscribe today for more digital marketing, sales, and business growth tips from the experts.